Hello, welcome to today's webinar. I am Suzanne Hilser-Wiles, President of GG&A, and I am excited to speak with today's guest, Kimberly Hopley, Executive Vice President for Development and Alumni Engagement at Rutgers University and President of the Rutgers University Foundation. Because of time constraints, we won't be able to take questions live during this webinar, but we encourage you to submit your questions via the chat button at the bottom or top of your screen or via GG&A's website, and we will post answers there in the coming days. Kimberly joined Rutgers from Arizona State University, where she served as the Senior Vice President and Chief Development Officer. Kimberly's distinguished career includes leadership positions in higher education, healthcare, and community organizations, and she serves on the faculty for the CASE fundraising program for deans and academic leaders. Kimberly, we are so excited to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be asked to address the group and to share some of my thoughts, Suzanne. Thank you.
Terrific. So you have a very interesting perspective as someone who has been a new vice president twice now. And when you and I spoke previously, you mentioned that you see a real rhythm between year one, year two, and year three, even though these institutions are very different. So can you share some of those similarities with our listeners so they would know what to expect if they find themselves in a similar position?
Well, I think one thing to remember is whether you're coming into a new organization or you're newly appointed as a vice president within the organization you currently serve, the role is new to you, and there will likely be areas that you want to address or change. So you're right. It seems that the pattern now over the course of multiple organizations that year one generally is a year of assessing, of making decisions for change that maybe is the reason you're in the role to begin with. Again, whether you came up from within or external to the organization. And so it tends to be really figuring out what the functions of your area are things coordinating and working together? And if not, somewhat diagnosing that and then making those decisions. Year two feels like it always seems to follow a bit of, I know it's super cliche, but the forming, storming, norming, because the forming part really, it's exciting. A lot of people are like, oh, they've been waiting for these changes, but they haven't lived in that new organizational structure. So year two tends to be maybe not as shiny, a little bit of, okay, now this is the reality of living in this structure, and some of the hiccups start happening. And then you have to tweak, because everything you think might work, you try, and then you learn, and then you adjust. So year two seems to be a lot of that. And I think from a vice president's job, when you're in that role of leadership, is setting some of those expectations for people to know what to expect, that it's not going to be all smooth and figured out in a year, that it's still going to be change. It's still going to be, again, trying things, learning from it, adjusting. And then year three is kind of like you're actually acclimated a bit more to the structure. You're living in it. You're not, it just feels very different. So I need you and everyone to know I'm in year two right now. So
right. The hard year.
I'm looking forward to year three.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I share with my leadership team and you know, in the entire organization, the emotional aspect of just one new leader in a role, in a vice president's role, whether there are multiple vice presidents or you are the, you know, the head of your area, it is change. And so those kind of rhythms do tend to happen.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, you shared a couple of important things and what you just said, a couple that I'd like to highlight. First of all, the need for assessment, even if you're already in the organization, right? You have a different lens, a different set of responsibilities. And I think a thoughtful approach to that is really important. Because to your good point, what you thought needed to happen when you were the AVP may look a little different when you're in the vice president's role. The other thing, you reminded me last week, I had a meeting with a client where his senior leadership team had been excited to have us come in and make some recommendations. And he said, now is the hard part where they realize not every change you recommend is the exact change they personally wanted. So I think getting everybody on board for what are the problems we're trying to solve for as step one, and then we can figure out, what are the paths forward. So yeah, I think that's a common phenomena with change.
I would add, it's very important. We did a common read on Simon Sinek, Start With Why, which is just to get a common language. But for leaders, it is so important to have a rationale for why you're doing something. What are we solving for? What do the outcomes that we're trying to solve for, what do they need to look like, or what do we want them to look like? And the creativity and where you can engage people is how. But it really is, I think some of that, year one, year two, year three has to start with why you're doing something, not just to change for change's sake, but what is the rationale and what are those outcomes? It's really important. And once you acclimate an organization or your area to that, I hear it back. Well, what's the why, Kimberly? What's the rationale?
Right.
And you can tell if you haven't made it clear, and sometimes it's because it isn't clear. And that's a good check on, are we really doing something for the organizational gain, or is this just a more of a preference rather than an organizational need?
Right. What's the real impact of this change? Because change is difficult.
Yes.
So yeah, that's terrific. I love that. So how did you prepare for your new vice presidency, and how is it different the second time around, or was it?
The first time, and I hope anyone that is recently transitioned into, again, a new institution or a new role, you need somebody in your life who is either an executive coach or someone who can, where you can talk through with them, what is the difference between what got me here and now what I need to deploy in this new role. And so in my previous position, I came in as a vice president of unit development, and then became the chief development officer. And in that transition, where I was one of a couple vice presidents versus then overseeing vice presidents, I was afforded, a 360 evaluation, somebody to kind of help me understand the difference, which there is. And for me, who values transparency, I don't forget where I came from. And it's so important to me that others don't view me as some, kind of arrogant, that persona. I want to be me, but it was so important to have somebody point out to me the bit more formality, which seems foreign, and to give me a chance to practice when I'm writing a memo, when I'm speaking to people, the weight of my words. All of a sudden, 2 weeks earlier, passing the hall, the weight of my words meant something. It might have influenced or, moved people to do things because they wanted to. And 2 weeks later with a different title, all of a sudden it's like, oh, are we losing our jobs? Is this donor, and it's perplexing because you haven't changed, yet the position and the role has. And
Mhm.
what I think all of us need to learn is we need to then change. We do need
Right.
to change to adapt to that, the weight of it. So that was helpful. And of course, the second time around, being much more mindful of that, and then knowing that it has to be elevated yet again. And those relationships, being clear on who my constituents are. And there's a loss. You grieve some of the very things that you loved the most about your job. But I think that's where some vice presidents maybe make some mistakes, is because they hold on to something that really isn't theirs anymore. And they deny someone else that opportunity to have that in their career. And instead of saying unique to our role, then now it's a board member, it's the president, it's our constituency changes, our direct reports. You become a little bit more isolated in some way, because now those people who report to you are managing the organization. And so you have to find ways to get out there to keep a pulse on the front line, without making it your job and taking that away. So definitely this time around, took the advice of others, came into it with some humility, knowing I need someone to give me some checks and balances and not burden one of my employees with that.
Yeah, no, that I think you're spot on. When I meet people who are new in leadership roles, one of the first thing I look for is self-awareness. Do they understand, what their own blind spots are? Are they thoughtful about it? Are they willing to take that kind of feedback? And your other point is an important one. Are they thoughtful about how they are perceived, not because of who they are as people sometimes, but really because of the role? I've had a couple of coaching conversations recently with women who are in those roles, who just have not been comfortable thinking of themselves as leaders.
Mm.
And therefore they don't think about how other people are perceiving them as the leader. And it's been very interesting to kind of help people see, you got to let go of whatever baggage you're bringing to this, because this is where you are in the organization, and your words carry a lot more weight than they probably did, as you said last Tuesday when you walked through the hall with a different title.
I love what you said though, Suzanne, because I think that, it's International Women's Day and you mentioned females and leaders, but, leading really is, there are a lot of times people will say servant leader, or they put a tag onto it, and I understand what they mean, but really in leadership, you have a very distinct role. And if you don't play that role, then the whole organization really can't be as effective. And it is decisions, and it is, by the time it gets to you, things that are not easily solved, or you wouldn't be making a decision on it.
You wouldn't be asked to weigh in. Yeah.
And I think kind of one of those things that as a self-reflection that people have to think about when they're, when they're in the role or considering continuing is you really do have to almost wake up and know, I'm glad it's me they're interviewing. I'm glad it's my name on that memo to a disgruntled alum, or I'm glad it's because you want to be the face of it. You want to take that responsibility.
Right.
But that is, you're right. It is, sometimes it needs to be reframed. Our female colleagues need it reframed as the way I can serve my organization the best is by leading. The way that I can be myself, the best expression of myself is in these roles where it asks me to be good at my profession, but also good at leading.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a great segue into our next question. Ensuring that you and your senior leadership team are aligned is a huge part of your ability to execute on your goals. How do you go about setting expectations with a new team from the beginning?
Well, my style, so this is my style, and this is
Yep.
uh honed over a couple of
Yeah.
iterations. I feel very strongly that and it's not always perfect, but there is that balance between, again, why are we here? What is
Hmm.
it that we have to achieve? How do we organize to do that? So before my week one, um, met with the senior leaders for this organization at Rutgers Foundation coming in.
Hmm.
Also met with the cabinet because I sit both on the president's cabinet and this, and then I have my own, organization.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's funny when you start the question with, what are we here for? And that
Hmm.
first retreat a week after I started, when we then gathered, was very clarifying because it wasn't clear what the foundation was here for. And then what are the functional areas that we need, that the university is depending on us to do, and what are we doing that doesn't fit with that? So it was very basic in bringing the senior, just first of all, listening and
Hmm.
identifying, were we on the same page? And I would say it became very clear to people who were sitting in that leadership role if they wanted to go into this next chapter or not, based on even some of those conversations
Hmm.
um, of, you know, because we were also dealing with a new president. So the organization now had to adapt to a different president who is externally facing. So our organization had to align with that. I would, so that I guess, to be clear, the first is really starting with, why are we here as an organization, and what are our roles in
Hmm.
that? And are we clear about what we are responsible for? Because if between this group, we are not covering every function that is needed for our existence, then we've got to address that. Um, because that's it, and kind of reminding them that we're it. You're at the top of your,
Right.
game now, and there is nobody else. Like we're the ones
Yeah.
running the organization. And then the second is, and I think this is important for anyone, is in a transition, normally you hear from people, you should only be managing this many people, or you should only be
Mhm.
making decisions up here. But in year 1 and 2, if you're not in the dirt, if you're not, you know, taking out the weeds and like getting it ready and planting the seeds and watering it and tending to it and growing it, and then trying to see if there's a crop, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a situational awareness for any leadership transition like that, to make sure that people aren't just relying on, well, I just talked to my AVP and they tell me. Like, you've got to get down in it and understand
Yeah.
what's really going on. And so for a period of time, you might be managing or making decisions or being more directive.
Hmm.
And then you can evolve back, to a more status quo of being more high level and strategic, because then your people, what's happening, the pulse of the organization. I think that's
Yeah.
so critically important.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the immediate challenges of these vice presidencies, because there is that push-pull between internal and external, particularly when you're not being promoted from within, like at ASU, but new to the organization, right? Getting to know your colleagues across campus, not to mention trustees and key donors. I think finding that balance is one of the hardest things in the first probably year or two for many vice
A
presidents.
lot to do, but
Yeah.
I think you bring up a good point. You have to set your mindset to, that's what this period of time is. It's
Right,
kind of an all
right. It
in,
won't always feel like that.
right? It's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah,
want to add, I think it's very important that, early on, well, what do you want us to do? I don't know. What do we need to do? Well, what
right.
are our metrics? I don't know. How do we measure ourselves? What would we measure? Why would we measure that? So to not assume, to make everything a critical thinking exercise, which is maddening for people, but I will
Yeah,
say now, a year and a half in, it's not, because
yeah,
it's giving people back their power to be critical thinkers and assess. And I say a lot of times, somebody made it up once and doesn't mean we have to follow it now.
right,
We need
right.
to solve for what we're solving for. And if things aren't broken, it's fine, but constantly asking those questions and then not having it be, well, you tell us. No, we will put forth a hypothesis of what we think this should be, and then we will listen to our organization to see what that feels like and what that experience is, and then we will make a decision, and then we will systematize something.
Yeah,
That is how, kind of to your point, how you get everyone on the same page, because
mhm,
they are part of it. And it also eliminates the whole, well, you came in and you made this decision and we didn't think it was right. Because if they have a voice, they have now a piece of that decision. And it also changes when it's, communicated. They can
mhm.
talk to anyone in your leadership team because they were all at the table, wrestling with these hard decisions together.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up this kind of continually assessing where we are and what we should be doing next as just on kind of good management practice ties back to something you said earlier, which is people need to stop and think, is this the organization that I want to serve? And do I want to fulfill this role in it? Or does this role even make sense? So I think sometimes we can also get to a place where it's wonderful to have long-term employees, but they should continually assess, is this the right fit for me? Am I the right fit for them? So that they don't lose that energy and creativity and excitement.
Yeah.
And I do think that sometimes people, they don't love the change, but they don't realize that there is an option, which is you don't have to be part of this next phase. You can wish the institution well and move on.
And that, absolutely. And do it in a way that is, gives a long enough runway for someone to land once they make that
Yeah.
decision. But I also, one of the things that has given me great joy in this transition is allowing people to say, where would you be,
Mhm.
if you've been here 10 years, are there areas, what are your strengths? What are the things that
Mhm.
you really care about? And then where would you go in the organization? So we had a lot of people going from, one vertical to another, and first letting our internal people make those decisions, like find, a spot that worked, of course, for the organization, but for them before we went outside,
Yeah.
to find other people so that they had an opportunity to kind of have a sparkle back and say, oh, this
Mhm.
is great. I know the organization, but I don't know it from this perspective.
Yeah, that's terrific. It's a wonderful way to retain really talented people too. So someday we're going to do a 4-hour webinar on what is actually the role of a private foundation with a public university. You alluded to that, and I think that is a real common challenge among the many public universities with which we work. What is the role of the foundation in getting alignment between the staff and the board and the president? So that I think is an added complexity given the kind of organizations that you work for.
You're right.
It's not just what's your remit on paper, but what do these important people think? Um, so so I know that there are a lot of AVPs listening today, Kimberly. So clearly, there are lots of people thinking about, is this the right role for me? But you and I have also known people who've gotten into this job and are very excited about the career trajectory part of it and end up deciding this isn't actually a job I like. So when people are thinking about whether or not they should pursue a vice presidency, what do you believe they should be spending time thinking about to really figure out, is this a good job for them?
Yeah. I think I want to preface this by saying more organizations. So for those of you who are in a VP role or leading organizations, need to really understand what it is your organization is trying to achieve and make sure that you are not putting false barriers for people's progression career-wise based on needing to manage or something else. Because I think for a lot of people, it is simply a matter of, how do I progress? I mean, a lot of us work in a place that is an extension of who we are, but we work and it's still work, and it's about, our financial stability and our families. So, we have to kind of get real about, and in our area, I would just say, we've got people who engage people really well. We've got fundraisers who fundraise, and then we have people that are really good at managing people or processes or projects. And then we have some people who can kind of do it all. And, but I think it's really important to make sure that there are pathways as high up as you can reasonably go within the size and scale of your organization. If you've got somebody that wakes up every day and they just want to close gifts, then don't limit their career path by saying, oh, now you have to manage 2 people in order to get a senior director job or a AVP job, because now you have put somebody who's not, whose strength is not managing, managing, and then possibly damaging human beings. And all they're trying to do is and they're not loving it either. And they're just trying to do better for themselves and the family. So I just philosophically feel like they need to say that. So then the self-reflection, one, I think you need to make sure you're in an organization where you are aligned. All of us have figured out that we need certain skills to move forward in whatever our careers. Most people in our work in development did not come up through this. Some have, but most of us have come into it. So I think you need to, and I've worked for some places to go, I need this and I can get behind it 80%. But when you are a leader in an organization, you absolutely, the first thing you need to check is, do I believe in what this organization is trying to accomplish? Because if you don't, you are already at odds with your own career success. It's not going to shine. You're not going to shine because you're going to be, you're kind of somewhat sabotaging just by the nature of you being in that role. If you have influence and if you feel that you can make a difference in that role, then that's different. But that would say the underlying premise is the organization that you're serving, you believe in it. You believe it's worthy of people's time, worthy of them lending their expertise, and worthy of them giving, financially to support it. And I think it's if you have not done a number of self-assessments to really know what you're good at. I think that's important because no leader comes without things that need to be compensated for. And it's so much easier if you just know what you're good at and what you're not. And, maybe back to your point of maybe we have this false sense of what leading is. And we think that means that someone has all the answers. And we think that, well, they must know all about
Mhm.
everything, or they wouldn't be in that job. And it could not be further from the truth. A good leader really knows what they're good at and knows what they're not, and then make sure that those are clear and that those areas are compensated for in staffing or in other areas. So I think that second piece for people is to really know yourself, know what
Mhm.
you're best at, and and determine with who, whatever that next step is for you. If you're coming up, are you in an organization that plays to your strengths? And
Mhm.
and is would there be the opportunity to compensate for those things that are not available to you? And for me, I've been in an organization with one employee and a lot of volunteers, and now 300 employees. So, but you still got to know what you're good at. And even if it's not an employee, I would make sure either on a board, somewhere in my organization, there was somebody that had a lens that could give me an insight, or someone that could spell check, or,
Yeah.
before there
Yep.
was proofread, or, it's so it's kind of getting comfortable enough with yourself to be okay to say, I'm great at this. I'm pretty good at that. I stink at this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you're getting. And I would say, getting used to, if you are, you have to think organizationally when you take on a role, anything, in an AVP and up. You have to think and have enough self-awareness to understand. So if you're looking at yourself as an AVP, and you feel like you don't have good organizational perspective, it would be really important to, if you're in fundraising, offer to sit on a budget committee, offer to do, just to give yourself, what does it look like from another perspective? If you're in operations, have you shadowed somebody who's on the field trying to bring in money for a week? If you're on the field trying to bring in money, have you sat with gift processing? Have you been in the finance office? You've got to almost proactively go out and find those opportunities for yourself, to really give yourself a perspective, to know, just even empathy, to know what
Right.
they're
Right.
dealing with, before you're in a position of leading.
Yeah, well, and it's a great point, because I think going back to, is this the right role for me? You're going to be responsible for all of that. So thinking about, am I interested, engaged enough to be the leader for these folks as well, not the day-to-day manager, but to have that level of responsibility and enthusiasm for what they do as well. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing your perspective and a bit about what you learned along the way. I also want to thank the GG&A team who produces these webinars, and all of you for listening. If you haven't, please connect with me and Kimberly and GG&A via LinkedIn. And again, submit questions via our website if you have them. Kimberly, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.